Hey, so this is the Drunkalogs, a podcast about addiction and recovery in which each guest shares their version of how it was, what happened, and how it is now, and then endures a half-hour Q&A at the hands of your host, Nick Morton. My next guest is a costume designer from South Florida who hit it hard when she was young and soon found herself in a state-run lockdown rehab by the time she was 17. But she found hope and sobriety and a spiritual experience in the most unlikely way, and here shares the wisdom of unconditional self-love. Won't you please welcome Lauren Morelli. The show is about addiction in all of its forms as opposed to just alcoholism, you know? So
cool.
So Lauren Morelli, how was it?
It was awful.
It was awful.
It was absolutely awful. It's like so crazy to me how much my life has changed.
Right.
You know? And
how long have you been sober?
I've been sober over 14 years.
14 years. Wow.
Which is wild.
Yeah.
You know, people are like, what did you get sober
How
out
old
of the
are you?
womb? Yeah, I'm only 32.
Right. 32.
So I got sober my last semester of high school.
Wow.
Which I'm grateful actually
Right.
that I didn't have to go back to high school and like go back into that environment because I don't think I would have been able to handle
Right.
it. Like seeing
Yeah.
the same people and like going right back to the same routine and like having to live with my parents again, you know, and like thank God I got 18 when I was in rehab.
Right.
You know, and so I was able
So you were able to
like,
just
kind
go.
of start branching off
Interesting.
into
Wow.
my own life.
How amazing. I drank a hole in my stomach when I was 18.
Oh geez.
And I got sober 22 years later. 22 years of wreckage. So you're lucky.
Yeah. People always say to me, they're like, how did you get sober so young? And I'm like, how are you so old? Like, how
Right.
did you
How
make
did you
it
survive?
this long?
Right.
Like, I was like
Yeah.
in a hospital overdosing at 17. Like, what did you do?
Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in South Florida.
What town? What part?
West Palm Beach.
West Palm
like,
Beach,
in that
right.
county.
Yeah, sure.
So it was very like, you know, it's very affluent there.
Yeah.
You know, the area that I was in, and I went to private school, and you know, it was very much like all about image and
Right.
perfectionism.
Right.
And, you know, you have to show off that everything is okay all the
Sure.
time, even when it's not.
Right.
And I am not like that
Yeah.
at all, you know, but I was learning that from my parents and the people around me.
Right.
Like, I didn't even know how awful my childhood was until I got into recovery
Right.
and started doing step work. Like, I thought it was perfect.
Sure.
And then when I really looked at it, I was like, oh, there was like a lot of trauma. Like, there was a lot of really painful stuff that I just stuffed down.
Like what?
My dad was bedridden and handicapped.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's intense.
From like when I was born until I was like 8 or 9 years old.
Right.
And like he was in and out of the hospital. We didn't know if he was going to walk again. They thought he was going to die.
What had happened?
He has spina bifida and a degenerative cartilage disease in his
Right.
spine.
Oh, right.
So he had like 9 surgeries, and they had to keep he's like put together with rods and screws.
And
like,
is he walking now?
Now he's walking.
That's amazing.
So he actually just last year came to visit LA it was his first time getting on a plane in 30 years.
Wow, that's
Like he
crazy.
hasn't ever been able to do that. So
That's
like
so
he didn't even
intense.
see my bedroom until I was 8 years old in the house. Like it was, you know, and the
How
kids would
wild.
like make fun of it because my dad is so funny. He refused to be in a wheelchair.
Right.
So instead what he did, and this is like so my family and me actually, is he took a lawn chair, like a reclining lawn chair, and then put wheels on it
Right.
and would wheel that around. And like to me it was normal.
Right.
Like we would go to dinner and there's like a man in a white plastic
Right.
reclining lawn
It's
chair.
like it
And I
is a
was like-
wheelchair.
And
you know, like-
it is a wheelchair. It's a chair on wheels. It's the same thing, Dad.
Right.
But to me, I was like, this is normal. Like, this is what people do when they're
Right.
in pain and they
Sure.
have back injuries. So it was like I had a dad, but didn't have a
Yeah.
dad at the same time, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
And then my mom had to go back to work constantly. She's in real estate. And so she's like never around.
Right.
And I was an only child. So I was just kind of left alone a lot of the
Mhm.
time, you know, and
Right.
was like resented my mother so much that, you know, she would always be late, you know, or
Right.
miss the ballet recital or whatever. And my dad couldn't come to the dance recital because he couldn't get up,
Right.
you know. So, and then I had ulcers as a kid. And they figured out as a result of the stress of all that.
Sure.
So I was
Wow.
in and out of the hospital.
Oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. So it was like, it was a lot it was a lot going on.
Right.
And what that did is it put me into this idea that I have to maintain the perfectionism.
Sure.
Like, if I'm perfect, then you'll love me. Like, that was what I kept thinking, was if I get straight A's, if I'm the best at everything I do the first time I do it, if I'm always happy, if I'm always okay, like, because there's so much chaos, I have to manage.
Right.
You know, and then it'll calm down.
I think my daughter's probably learning the same thing right now.
It's really, and it was so detrimental, you know, because also when you're that young, you don't really have anyone to talk to, and you're learning about feelings and trying to understand, like, what am I feeling? What am I going through? How do I help self-soothe? Yeah. You know, and so my ways of self-soothing were really unhealthy.
Like, when you were little, what would you do to self-soothe?
I know that I definitely, like, was an alcoholic from the beginning.
Sure.
Because I had asthma also.
Right.
And I noticed when I was like 6 years old that if I used my inhaler when I didn't need it, I would get, like, kind of jittery, and I would go to sleep really well.
Right.
And I would, like, hide behind my dad's chair and just, like, eat so many Flintstones vitamins. Right. And I, like, kept a box, like, the whole bag of powdered sugar under my bed, and would just eat it with a spoon. Like, I did this, like, weird, like, hoarding food thing. Right. Was, like, my first kind of weird addictive behavior with a lot of sugar and stuff like that. And my mom, like, never really, like, confronted me about it. Like, she would find it and was just like, oh, Lauren loves food. Like, it I don't think it really registered, like, for her or me or my dad.
Yeah, sure.
So I was, like, already doing weird behaviors to try to cope with what was going on. And then I remember having this, like, obsession with wanting to drink for the first time. Like, I would just, because I felt like it would make me an adult.
Did your parents drink?
Not a lot. Right. Like, I've never seen my dad drunk ever in my life. My mom would get, like, a little tipsy. Right. And then once I got sober, she, like, cut back. But I mean, it was, like, every once in a while. Like, they have bottles of booze for entertaining. Sure. But they don't really drink. Right. So I would see them, you know, so adult and mature, having, you know, a glass of wine or a beer with their friends. And it was, like, this camaraderie that I wanted. And so I begged my dad for a sip of his beer. Right. And he gave me a sip. And I was like, oh my God, I can't wait to have
How
this.
old were you?
I think I was like 8. Right. You know, which, like, my dad, I mean, it was, like, harmless. Like, I didn't get drunk. He didn't let me have it or anything.
It's funny. I would always get my dad beers from the fridge and bring them to him. And I would always drink them from the time as long as I can remember, from when I was, you know, that age. And, like, I knew how it felt. Like, I liked it.
Yeah. It's so weird that I was like, where did I even get this idea? Like, where did this come from? That I just knew that was the answer. Sure. You know? So the first time I got, like, drunk. Hammered. I think I was 12 or 13, and I was in Mexico with my mom. Right. In Mexico, they do not care. So I drank 7 cups of tequila and Sprite. And was trashed.
I'll bet.
My mom and I went shopping, which is the worst idea to go drunk shopping. We bought the ugliest stuff. Right. And she was like, do not tell your father. Right. Like, she didn't know. She thought I had one. Right. And I kept, like, sneaking more and asking the guy for more.
Wow, I can't believe you were able to handle that much.
I could handle
and not barf.
Immediately. You know, I think I only puked, like, once or twice ever.
The whole time?
The whole time I was using. Amazing. And that was because, like, I had an empty stomach or something. So I just learned, I was like, you have to eat before you do this. Right. But yeah, and I loved it. Right. And, like, I don't know how it, like, progressed. I just remember the next step is, like, being in 7th grade and, like, sneaking vodka, like, in my orange juice to school. Wow. And then, like, sharing it with my friends on the football field. And the principal came up one day and is like, why are you guys all drinking out of the same bottle? Right. And I was like, oh, it's because Florida oranges. I was like, oh, it's, like, fresh squeezed orange juice from my backyard. Do you want some? Wow. You know, it's like, I just like, the instant lie. Right. You know?
And so you were the corrupter?
I guess I was the corrupter.
Did you feel like you had partners in crime in that? Like the other
like
kids were into it?
They were totally
like,
into
cool.
trying
it.
They wanted to try it. But I was also a dare kid. I was like, I will never do drugs. Like that's, and I looked down at people who did drugs. I was like, I'll never smoke weed. I would never do any of that.
How old were kids at your school when they would like start smoking weed?
There was a kid that got kicked out because it was private school in like 8th grade for smoking weed in the bathroom, which is like, how dumb can you
why
be?
Would you do
like,
that?
Of course you're going to get caught.
Step outside.
Yeah, like go somewhere else. But and everybody was like so distraught and, oh my God, he's doing drugs. And it was like this huge thing.
Wow, right.
But meanwhile, I'm like drinking out of a water bottle, like
drunk
a
at school.
pint of vodka every single day.
Oh my God.
So I don't know if it was every day. Like I have no idea, but I remember that. And I remember doing that.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And so then what happens?
So then I hated private school.
Right.
Because it was very like you have to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Right.
And I love the arts. Like that was where I excelled. And I mean, of course I had straight A's because I'm a perfectionist and I have to. And it was like, my dad drives the Ferrari. What does your dad drive?
Right.
And I was like the poor kid, you know, and I was weird. And like, I was very weird. And all my friends were very weird. And people like in 5th grade, like people knew that I was bi or like a lesbian. And I didn't know. Right. Like it would,
How do you know people knew?
Because they would call me.
Oh,
they'd be like, and they were like, oh, Lauren's dating Ashley. Like they would just say things. And weird. I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know how they knew that. Right. So I think like that might have had something to do with it too. Sure. It was like, no one, like there was a weird thing about like, oh, we think this kid's gay and we think this kid's gay. Like it was so stupid.
Right.
So I just hated it. And so, thank God they raised the tuition a crazy amount that my parents didn't want to pay. So they let me go to public school.
Nice.
And I went to a super liberal public arts magnets program that you like audition to get in.
Right.
And it was like the most hippie school ever.
Right.
We had drum circles at lunch. Like everyone's just like smoking weed and like making art, and your math teacher didn't care if you didn't go because you had an art project you had to do.
Right.
So I majored in communications there, which was like film production and creative writing because that's what I wanted to do. Yeah. But I was also a professional ballerina at the same time from when I was like 13 years old.
That's intense.
Yeah. So my schedule was like always full. Like I was always doing something. And that experience became really painful because I hit puberty. Right. And they were like obsessed with all of us being under 100 pounds. Right. Like we had weigh-ins and they had a chart every week and would write down how much you weighed, and you had to lose weight every week no matter what. And they would like have these seminars where people would come in and they would say, don't swallow your spit until you're under 100 pounds. And they would make me dance with like 10-pound bags of sugar on my arms to see how much easier it would be if I lost 20 pounds. Right. So I went from being like the star of this academy and being invited to join their professional company to having to teach other adults how to do my roles that I had done the year before. Right. And it was really, really degrading.
Because
because I had gained weight.
You'd gained weight and they were like, you can't do it.
I was becoming a woman. And they were like, oh, the men can't lift you. And like, you don't look right, on the stage. And, it was, you don't fit in the costumes. And, and they would bring my parents in and like have meetings about this. Oh, God. So my mom took me to Weight Watchers at like 13 years old, which like everyone in Weight Watchers is like, why the fuck is she here? Because I weigh normal, I look normal.
Kid.
I look totally normal. So that like kicked off my like anorexia and bulimia. And so that was like my first like really bad addiction because I was so obsessed with like, again, I have to be the best at everything I do because then that means I'm okay. And it would validate me and make me feel like I was a good person. Right. That it's like I have to have success. And so it's like that is abuse. Like that's what that is that they were doing,
definitely.
know? And my parents like asked me to quit. And I was like, no, I'm not quitting. I have to do this.
That's the worst.
So it's like I'm like going to school and, enjoying the arts and all that, but I wanted to dance. And I was like, I don't know, like, which path I really want to take. But, I mean, the ballet was, like, 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. Like, it was all about that. Right. And so when my like anorexia and bulimia got really bad, and I was like passing out at school in the bathroom, and like people would find me, and I was probably like 15 years old. You know, and I was drinking, but I wasn't really doing much else yet.
Right.
And my friends actually did an intervention on me with like the health teacher at school, and I knew that I had a problem. Like I knew I was going to die.
And was the intervention eating related?
Yes. It was eating related because they knew what was going on. Out of control. Yeah. It was like I got to a point where I wasn't eating and was still purging.
Right.
And so it was like just this compulsive, obsessive, you know, and I was so weird with my parents about what I would eat. Like I would only eat cauliflower for like weeks, you know, and then I was like, I'll only eat lettuce, and then I'll only eat, you know, but then I would like completely binge and eat an entire family-sized box of Cinnamon Toast Crunch. Like one Halloween I ate so much candy and cookies, I couldn't physically breathe. Like I had to lie down. So it was like, you know, once I started with that, I couldn't stop. You know, it's like I couldn't stop consuming. And so I listened in the intervention, and these like professionals came to my school and talked to me. And, you know, they were like, anytime that you feel like, you know, binging or purging, you can call us and we'll come and we'll get you out of class. And I was like, oh, great. Now I could just get out of class all the time. So I called them one day, and I was like, fantastic. I get to just like sit here and talk to people.
And do you have a cell phone? Or how do you call them from there?
No, from the school.
Right.
Yeah, I had to like go to
the office.
Yeah, because this was back in the day where people didn't have cell phones when they were 6 years old.
Of course.
When you had to like be driving, and that's when your parents would get you a phone. And so the second time I called them, they were like, if you call us again, we have to tell your family. And I was like, wait, that was not the deal.
Never the rule.
That was not the deal. But I mean, it was a minor.
Yeah.
Like, of course they had to let them know. So I finally decided to tell my parents, you know, and I was like, I need help.
Oh, so your parents weren't aware of the intervention or anything?
They didn't know anything was going on. Like the school, which is weird now I think about it. Like the school never told them. Like nobody ever said anything. Crazy. Yeah, so no one ever said anything. So I finally said something, and I was like, I need help. So they got me a therapist, and I like started taking antidepressants. And honestly, I think like the day I went to therapy and started working on my eating disorders was like the next week I was doing drugs. Like it switched.
Right, it just switched.
Like it just switched addictions immediately. Like I remember all of a sudden I like really wanted to smoke weed when I was 15.
Sure.
And I was like, I want to try that.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy to me because I smoked weed, and of course I slept for like 14 hours afterward. And I remember I like took a couple hits and started to feel it, and I just looked at my friend and was like, I want to be a drug addict. Like, why did I want that?
Right.
Like, why was I interested in that? All of a sudden.
Did it feel that good?
It felt so good.
Yeah, I mean, that's for me. Like, I just remember like smoking pot and being like, oh, there's a whole other thing to explore. Like, that was exciting to me.
I was so happy. And like, everything was funny. And it was like, you know, I felt like I was an adult, and like everything in my life could just shut off for a while.
Right.
And I really liked that.
Sure.
So, you know, so then I was like, you know, I was just like getting weed from my friend.
Right.
And then I was like, wait, who's your connect? Because I want to get my own.
Right.
And then I started buying like way more weed so I could sell it.
Sure.
So that, you know, because like, how do you get money as like a 16-year-old, 15-year-old? Like I don't have a job. Like I still don't know how the hell I afforded my habit.
Right.
So then I started like to get money. I would like at my school, there was like the high school and then the grocery store and then my dance studio. So I would like walk to my dance studio every day after school. So I would go to the grocery store, and usually we would get like dinner. And so I would stand outside the grocery store and be like, oh, my mom forgot to give me money for dinner. Like, can you give me a couple dollars? You know, and you look like a normal kid.
Yeah.
And people just give me money.
That's amazing.
You know? And so I like used that and like would take money out of my mom's purse to go and like get what I needed.
Right.
You know? And I just like got to a point where I would just walk into like a gas station or liquor store and just take like 2 handles and just walk out.
Right.
Like, I didn't care at all about, like, getting caught. And nobody said anything. Like, no, I didn't hide it in my bag or my coat. I just walked out with it in my hands. Like, and I had to make amends to those places.
Right, sure.
You know, but I just didn't care. And I was also like dating like older men, you know, I mean like 10 years older, which now I'm like, oh, that's like technically rape.
And where would you meet them?
Just like on the streets.
Right.
Just like on the streets of like downtown West Palm.
And are you still dancing at this point?
Still dancing.
Right. And they're letting you dance?
Dancing. It's like
just kind of
the
like
fight. Because now, of course, I'm like gaining weight, you know, and so I'm getting like more and more depressed. And I know that like taking drugs and antidepressants definitely doesn't go together. Yeah. So it like wasn't really helping.
And are you out and as bisexual at that point now?
No, it was weird. It was like I fell in love with every one of my best friends.
Sure.
Like every time I had a best friend, like, and there was this one girl that we would have sleepovers and we would just like lie there and stare at each other. And I was like, oh my God, I want to kiss her. But she was dating one of our friends. Right. So it was like I couldn't, and I didn't want to ruin the relationship and like make it weird.
Right. Yeah.
And
totally.
she actually, when I was a freshman in college, just called me one night. I hadn't talked to her in months. And she was like, did you have feelings for me in high school? And I just said yes. And she was like, okay, I did too.
Oh, no.
And I was like, oh my God, I missed my opportunity to like explore as a teenager.
Right. Could have made it happen.
Like I could have done it, you know? But I mean, whatever.
Right.
But, so I was like ignoring.
Right. Those impulses, right.
I was totally ignoring because I was like boy crazy, you know? Because of course, like having a romantic relationship, I was insane. Like I had this one boyfriend who ended up, I found out, was dating 3 other girls at the same time. He was such an asshole. And I would stalk him. Like I would get in my car and follow him everywhere because he lied constantly. He like said he had tuberculosis and I believed it. Like I was just insane. And so I would stalk him. I would like sit outside his house. I was just like, oh my God, please love me. Because I needed someone to love me. And my relationship with my parents was like getting worse and worse because they could tell. You know, that like I was drinking and they caught me smoking weed and, you know, they thought it was a crack pipe. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not doing crack. Like, I would be way worse than this. Totally. And so this boyfriend I had told me that like, he was like, never do cocaine because all my friends in this horrible friend group of dropouts were like all doing coke. And they were like, don't ever do it. Like we have a feeling you'll get like a little too addicted. Right. And so he had told me he never did it. And I walked in on him once in like with some friends in the bathroom and he was just doing like
snorting rails. Yeah.
And so I just like looked at him and out of resentment, I was like, I'm going to do it too. And just like snorted the rail, like didn't even think for a second. Right. Just like instantly. And that like from that moment, I think it took like 6 or 8 months for me to end up in a psych ward. Right. Like I just tanked so quick. And then I just became a dumpster. Like peyote was my jam. Like I figured out, I was like, okay, everything I could put up my nose, I put up my nose. Right. Like as a kid, I would snort so much sugar. Right. Like I had just been snorting things my whole life. Like
I had snort this peyote?
I snorted peyote.
And would you
like
trip mescaline.
On it? Oh my God, yeah. Right. But then I would still go to school and get straight A's.
Right. Wow.
Like I was able, and people were like, how do you function? And I was like, I don't know, I'm just fine. Right. The walls are melting and colors look great and I'm really happy. Like that was, you know, so it was like, and I would just leave in the middle of the night and like go shrooming and my parents would call the cops, you know, and because my friends were 18, the cops were like, it's kidnapping. So then my friends would just like drop me off in a field on the side of the road and be like, we're not getting in trouble for this. Yeah, totally. You know, so they would have to like come get me. Like I didn't care anymore. Like I got to a point where I was so miserable and I couldn't stop. And like, triple C's like horsey and cough and cold, I would just like pop them all day long. Right. Like if I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I was like, I'm going to take 6 pills. Like I just couldn't stop. And like, thank God I didn't have access to like any like heroin or meth because I would have done it, you know, but it was mostly like hallucinogens and cocaine. Wow. Like that was what I was doing. Yeah. It was because like, and I didn't really like weed anymore because I was like, I want to get shit done. Right. Like, I want to, like, be awake for this high. Right. You know, like, I want to be completely present and experiencing, like, happening. The beauty of this. And so it, like, got to a point where, you know, I, like, got super suicidal. Mm-hmm. Like, super suicidal. I would just, like, cry myself to sleep. And my mom would, like, sit in front of me and she's like, what is going on? And I couldn't even voice how I was feeling or what was happening. And so one of my friends who like wasn't a total degenerate at school, he like had a little bit of a cocaine problem.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, well, I think like I might. So let me talk to him. And so we did like AOL Instant Messenger because that was really cool back then. And so I was like, hey, like, how did you stop doing coke? And he was like, I woke up one morning and I said, I'm not going to do it today. And I was like, well, that's funny. Because I've done that like every morning, and by 9 a.m., I've had 4 shots of Grey Goose, 4 shots of Goldschlager. I've smoked a blunt. I have an 8-ball to get me through the day, and I'm snorting peyote in the parking lot at school. So I don't know what you're doing.
Right.
That's different. And like I would tell myself, like, okay, I'm gonna like I had a calendar. And I would switch drugs every week. Like I started doing that because I was like, then I'm not physically addicted.
Right.
Like then I'm not addicted to drugs.
Sure.
And I started taking AP psychology so that I could like understand like what cocaine was doing to my reuptake inhibitors and like the serotonin level. Like I felt if I was educated, and like Arrowwood Vault was a big thing where you could like study drugs and their, you know, reactions and all this stuff. I was like, if I'm educated and not ignorant, then I couldn't possibly be addicted. Like that's why people get addicted, because they're ignorant. So I kind of knew that I had a problem. But honestly, like the biggest issue for me was the emotional bottom of just like I had a suicide book. And I would write down like all these really elaborate ways to kill myself that would be so artistic so that everyone could see how much pain they had caused me. You know, like it was so dramatic. And actually when I had a few years sober, my mom told me she knew about the book.
Oh, wow.
And she would read it and she would just intervene like at every, like right before every plan that I had to kill myself so that I wouldn't kill myself.
Wow.
So it's like I owe my life a lot to my parents.
So intense.
It was really, I can't imagine. And like it got, my parents would like take turns sleeping.
Right. So that someone could keep an eye on you.
Yeah. Because like they took the door off my room. Like it was just, I wasn't allowed to have friends over anymore. They took my car away, my phone away.
So you guys were like at each other.
Oh my God.
Screaming and like
it was screaming constantly. God. I didn't want to be home, you know, because I felt like, well, if my parents just didn't like get up my ass so much, I wouldn't have to get high as much as I do. Like if they just let me do what I wanted to do, I would feel so much better.
Right.
You know, and if I could just get the lead in the ballet, then I would feel better and I wouldn't get high like I do. And if I could just get the relationship I wanted and, you know, then I wouldn't get high as much. Like it was always about if the outsides were good, then the inside would feel better.
Totally. I still believe that.
And it's not.
As much as I want to lie to myself about it, I still fall into that trap.
It's not possible.
Right.
You know, and I learned when I came to recovery that I was like, oh my God, that's so exhausting. Like, what an exhausting way to live.
Sure.
Like, constantly having to manage my whole life.
Yeah.
Like, what a relief that I get to, like, turn it over to the universe and just be like, what is.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and thank God I've done that because my life is so much bigger and better than I would have ever planned it.
Amazing.
You know? So
what happened ultimately?
So what happened ultimately is I quit dancing because I was so miserable. I like got an after school job as a hostess at like some restaurant and I was trying to like stay sober, which to me staying sober was just drinking only and not doing drugs. And I thought I made it 30 days. I don't think I did. And I was miserable. Like I was absolutely miserable. And this
was as a result of your text message conversation with your friend who had stopped doing coke?
Who had stopped doing, like kind of. It was like that and like,
other stuff.
Because I had gotten so I got sober January 29th. So Thanksgiving, this was like right before I quit because I quit dancing like right at Christmas. I sat my parents down at Thanksgiving and I explained to them how I was going to murder them.
Wow.
And I was like, I'm going to kill you.
Right.
And I'm going to stab you to death. Or you can give me $30,000 and I'll leave forever and I'll never talk to you again.
Wow.
And which, like, I love that at 17, I thought 30 grand was like
enough
money
for me
You'll
to fine for the rest of your life.
Like, clearly I knew nothing about money. And I was like, the reason I'm going to kill you is because I'm the only child. and I'm going to make it look like you killed each other. Right. And then I'll get all your money.
Right.
And I'll get the house and I'll get everything. And like, that was my best plan.
You sure?
Like, so insane.
Yeah.
Like, so insane. And my mom just looked at me and she was like, go ahead. I already told my lawyer if anything happens to me, my daughter did it. Because I would like stand over her with like a knife in the middle of the night. Like I was so nuts. And so I was so miserable. So I quit dancing at Christmas. I got a job for like all of 29 days. And I was doing a little better. Like I was doing a little better. I was managing it a little bit. But it got to a point where like I was starting to like fail my classes that semester. Like I couldn't show up for school. I just like couldn't really – I was trying to just like put one foot in front of the other. And so there was this girl at my work that I became friends with, and I was like, for some reason you could buy mushrooms at the head shop down the street.
Wow.
Which like I don't know how that was legal. It was like for like display purposes only.
Right.
Like you buy them to display in a plastic jar in your house, which like doesn't make any sense. So I was like, well, that's easy. So I got these mushrooms and I was like kind of was like, okay, I'm just going to do it once.
Right.
You know, and I invited her and my mom let her sleep over. It was like the first sleepover I'd had in months. And so we both took them. I had like 5 caps, like huge ones. Right. She had like 2. And I went to sleep. Like I didn't even feel loaded anymore. Wow. It was like I just went to bed. And she went to sleep too. And then she woke up and was like screaming about how like the Chinese are coming to kill us. And like, you know,
just
like she
having
went
a really bad trip.
Really bad trip. And so I was like, shh, like my parents are going to hear you. Like you have to shut up. Like be quiet, be quiet. And so she ran into the living room and collapsed on the floor and was like foaming at the mouth, like full on like seizing and psychosis. And my parents ran out and they're like holding her arms down. And I just looked at this whole scene and just went back to my room and went to bed. Like that was my reaction. Was just like, oh my God, how annoying that I have to deal with this.
Right.
So my mom dragged me out of bed, made me sit on her legs. And she finally told my dad, like, call 911.
Right.
You know, they didn't even know this girl's name hardly. Right. Yeah. Like, I didn't even know this girl really. And so she ended up biting a chunk out of my mom's arm. And my mom had to, like, beat her in the face to get her to let go. Like, it was really traumatic.
Horrible.
And so I'm looking, like, I'm, like, sitting on this girl's legs, looking into her eyes. And I got so jealous that she was getting to die. Like, I was so jealous. I was like, I took more than her. I've been doing this longer. Why isn't this me? Like, I just want to be a vegetable on a morphine drip in the hospital for the rest of my life. And like something clicked in my head and I was like, this isn't normal. Right. Like, why do you want to die so bad? Like, why are you so miserable? And so the ambulance came and I guess like I was overdosing too. And like I didn't even know I had a previous overdose on cocaine, on New Year's. And so they took us to the hospital and that was when I just like got honest. Like they like asked me, what drugs have I taken? And I just named everything. I like named everything I'd ever done, like Xanax and Percocet and like blah. And I just went off. And I didn't know they meant that night. Right. I thought they meant ever. Right. So they were like, okay, this is a suicide attempt. Right. And I was like, no, wait, shit. No, this isn't. And I was like, no, I made a mistake. So once I got sober, like in the hospital, like I had been, you know, there for whatever overnight, I like looked at my mom and I was like, okay, well, I have to be at work. Can you take me to work? Right. Like it was just like, okay, like this happened. Right. And now like we're moving on. Let's get on with it. Right. Like now we're moving on. And they were like, no, like you're going to a psych ward. Right. So, you know, I packed up some stuff and I went to a psych ward and, you know, I watched the video on ecstasy and was like, it burns holes in your brain. And I was like, okay, I'm never doing drugs again. Right. Like, I know I have a problem. Like, I'll be fine. Like, I'll drink, but I'm, you know, like I can't do drugs anymore. Uh-huh. And so after the 3 days, like the 72-hour hold, you know, I was still 17. So my parents were like, we don't want you anymore. Right. Like, we don't want you in our house. We don't feel safe. Yeah. Like, they didn't know what to do. Like, my dad would just scream at me, just stop. Right. And I couldn't. You know, and I would cry and say, I can't. Right. So they Marchman acted me, which is you can be Marchman acted or Baker acted in Florida. And what it means is that you haven't actually been caught for any of your crimes, but you're a danger to society.
Right.
And so my parents took me to court. Like I had a lawyer and like the whole thing. And my mom had a 16-page account of all of the threats I had made on her life and like what I had been doing to my family and how like I wasn't going to school and I was like on drugs all the time. And so I was court ordered to go to like a state-run facility, like a lockdown facility for adolescents. And if I got loaded, like if I relapsed or if I ran, I would go to jail.
Right.
And I was turning 18, so it was going to be like big girl
real jail. Right.
Like big girl jail. Yeah. And so I just like gave up. You know, my lawyer was like, we can fight this. And I was like, for what?
Right.
Like, what am I going to do? Go back and live there? Like, I'm miserable. I don't want to live with my parents anymore. Like, great. I'm just going to go. And so I just went to rehab and was like, fine, and like gave up. And it was a 4-month program.
And how was it? Was it like?
Oh, it was hell. It was absolute hell. Like, it is not like that rehab was ghetto.
Right.
Like ghetto, because it was a state-run lockdown facility. Like, we did not get to leave. You got like one phone call a week for 5 minutes. Like, you couldn't even get mail for the first couple weeks you were there. And like, I got the shit beat out of me.
Right. I was going to say, was it safe? No.
No. Like, I mean, you would get your head slammed against the wall. Like, you know, they were trying to like, they would pour hot, I don't know how we even got hot wax in that place, but this girl like poured hot wax on my stomach and like ripped some of my skin off. Like, it was brutal.
Wow.
You know, but we still had to like go to school in there. And I like started teaching the classes because these girls, like one of them asked me, she's like, how do you spell of? Is it O-F or O-V?
Right.
And I was like, it's O-F. Like they, you know, they were so bad too. And they were like 13 years old on PCP, you know? And so we were all just like a mess.
And were they doing recovery meetings there?
Yes.
So you had to attend 12-step meetings? We had
H&I that would come in, and that's when I was introduced to 12-step programs and like what the word alcoholic meant.
Right.
Because I thought, and like drug addict, because I thought an alcoholic was like an old man with a brown paper bag, like homeless under a bridge. Yeah. Like, it wasn't a 17-year-old girl from the suburbs. Like, that was not an alcoholic. And no one else that I knew, like in my family, was alcoholic. Right. And I actually learned that my mom's father died of alcoholism when she was like 6. And I have this picture in my house of him. And he's like sitting at the kitchen table, and you can see it's like 9 a.m. on the clock. And he's like in a robe, and there are at least 40 bottles of beer on the table empty. Like, so I see that. I'm like, okay, like I probably got it from him.
That's where you got it,
like, I might have got it from him. But there was no one like me around me.
My great-grandfather died of cirrhosis when he was 37.
Oh my gosh.
And, but still my grandmother, she just died, but she was 98, but she was like, and people say, you know, she was just like, took issue with the idea that he was an alcoholic. Yeah. I'm like, he died of cirrhosis at 37.
Yeah. I mean, like, of course he's an alcoholic. Jesus. Yeah, so I did, you know, as much as I could as a goody two-shoes, you know, in the rehab center.
And did you find, like, was there some peace eventually? I mean, really just, like, physically, like, were there periods where you had your posse, or you felt like, I'm not in danger?
No, I did. Like, once, because I also came in there with an attitude, because I was the oldest. And so I was like, I'm going to run this place. Right. Like, that was, you know, where I was I don't have to listen to 14 and 15-year-olds. Like, I'm 17.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, like, I saw the gratitude, particularly when we would go to school, that I was like, oh my God, like, I have hope for a future. And, like, these girls, like, a lot of their parents were drug addicts. Right. You know?
And did you like, did you start to feel some sense of, like, relief in there? Like, or hope for yourself?
I would go back and forth.
Yeah.
Like, I had a notebook, and I would be like, oh, I'm never going to do drugs again. I feel so much better. And then literally the next sentence would be like, I can't wait to get out and get high.
Right.
Like, it was like the disease had taken over my mind so much. And I, like, couldn't make a decision. Right. And so this woman came in and spoke and told her story. And, like, cocaine was also her thing. And I don't remember what she said. But what I connected with was that she smiled the entire time. Right. Like, she was laughing about what had happened. She was so happy. And I was like, why is this woman so happy?
And how old was she?
She was like probably early 20s.
Right. How interesting.
And she had a sports car and a puppy, and she was moving to LA to be an actress. And of course, I liked all those things.
Right.
And I mean, like, my first share in the, like, meeting that we had was fuck this cult shit. Like, that's how I felt about recovery,
right.
you know, because there was so much God and higher power, and, like, my bishop had molested kids in the church, like,
right.
when I was in, you know, and so I was like, please do not tell me religion is the answer.
Right.
But I saw how happy she was.
Right.
And I was like, I want that. Like,
yeah.
I want to smile again.
Right.
And so people said, like, get a sponsor, you know? And also, if you had a sponsor, once you had been there like 3 months, they could take you to one meeting a week.
Right. Okay. So yeah, to get
of
get
course,
a jail
like,
card.
yeah,
right.
of course I'm going to ask her. So I asked her to be my sponsor, and she took me to my first meeting.
Wow.
And it was like, you know, in a church on Palm Beach Island. It was beautiful, you know, and
what church?
I thought Bethesda by the Sea.
Donald Trump's church.
Yes, actually, we had a meeting the day he got married. They let us still have a meeting. Hilarious.
Right.
And so I went to that meeting, and, like, I did not know anything about 12-step programs. Like, I asked the leader of the meeting if he was, like, the president.
Right.
Like, I was so in a fog.
Sure.
And people were like, no, there's no, like, president. Like, I thought that was the only meeting in the world.
Oh,
like, I had no idea this was, like, millions of people and a worldwide thing. And so I started working the steps with her, you know, and I still thought I could drink. And honestly, I wouldn't call myself an alcoholic for the first 4 years that I was sober. I wouldn't do it because I was like, drugs are the problem, not alcohol. But thank God I've never relapsed, you know?
How, I wonder at that age, how did you come to define a higher power for yourself?
Honestly, I started with my stuffed animal.
Right. Which was with you
was Sharky, which was with me in rehab. And I had a spiritual experience. Like, I kind of had done step 1, 2, 3 without knowing it. Like, I think it was like I had detoxed, and it was like the second night I was there, and I was left alone in a room with like white table, white chairs, white walls, like, and I didn't have any of my addictions. Like, they knew I was bulimic and anorexic, so like I couldn't, you know, act out on that. I couldn't spend money. I couldn't, like, call some guy for validation. I couldn't talk to my parents. I couldn't cut myself. I couldn't, like, you know, get drugs. I couldn't drink. I couldn't do any of the things I like to do to get out of my feelings. Yeah. And for the first time, I had to just sit and exist. And it was the most horrible feeling I had ever felt.
Sure.
And so, like, what did I do? I, like, cried up to the ceiling.
Right.
And was just circling the room and was like, please take this feeling away from me. Please take this feeling away from me. And I felt this, like, force come down and just, like, wash over me. And, like, it put me in bed and gave me, like, a kiss on the forehead and was like, you're going to be okay. So, like, amazing. That I clung to, where I was like, okay, I asked for the obsession to be removed, and it was removed. So I didn't know what that was. Right. But I knew it was possible.
And you didn't have that language that you just used
at that
point to explain it. But idea. You knew that there was relief somewhere
like, I was
there.
like 5 days sober.
Wow.
You know, like, I didn't know what was happening.
Sure.
And so she, you know, was like, listen, like, doing step 2 and 3 is just, like, opening the doorway. It's just admitting that you are not in control. Right. Like, you cannot manage your life. You're absolutely crazy. Right. And she taught me what the definition of an alcoholic was, you know? And so, like, I got it. Like, I got the first part, like, the physical craving.
Sure.
Like, once I put it in my system, I could not control how much I had. Like, we're seldom mildly intoxicated. I was never mildly intoxicated. I was always mildly intoxicated. So I got that. So I was like, okay, well, then I just don't take the first one. But how do I do that? And she was like, well, the next problem is you have a mental obsession, which means that you think it's going to be different this time. Right. You always think it's going to be different. Right. You're always planning and scheming, like, you know, oh, well, I'm not going to do coke. I'm only going to drink. I'm only going to do it with these people. I'm just going to bum. I'm not going to buy it. You know, it's like only 5 p.m. and later. Like, oh, I won't do it at school. Like, like all these rules that I would break. And I would always do it again.
It's really interesting, that idea that, like, you think it's going to be different.
You always think it's going to be different.
Always think this is the one that's going to be different. This'll. Sometimes it would, but it would.
Well, it would work for like a day.
Yeah.
You know, totally. It's like I could do it for like a day. Yeah. So I was like, okay. And she said, and I said, well, how do I get rid of that mental obsession? And she said, the only way to do that is with the third part of your disease, which is a spiritual malady.
Right.
And so something greater than yourself has to remove that obsession. Like, if thinking is the problem, thinking can't be the solution.
Right.
You know? And so I heard that. And so I like had the tiniest amount of willingness. I was like, I'm not saying the Our Father. I'm not holding hands. I'm not praying. Like, I'm not doing any of that. And so she was like, prayer can be anything. Like, you don't have to get on your knees. You know, like, I needed it to be really open and like not be told. Like, some people, you know, in the program are like, you get on your knees so that you're humbled.
Right.
And like, I just couldn't handle that.
Sure.
Like, I was in such a fog still that I just needed it to be simple. So she was like, just have a conversation with your stuffed animal every night.
Right.
Like, just start having a conversation with a higher power and just talk about how you feel and talk about your day.
Right.
And so I started doing that. And it just was a practice of like communicating even within myself of like what was going on and connecting with a deeper me.
Right.
And that helped open the door of like willingness to believe in something bigger, you know?
Wow. That's amazing. Everything you just said for the past 5 minutes, I think is fucking mind blowing.
Right?
Really. Yeah.
Like, it was such a, like, I'm so grateful for that explanation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, you're so lucky that you found a sponsor who's so good.
Yeah. And she had like 3 years sober. Like, you know, it was like so amazing. And she was so patient with me.
And I'm curious, how has your conception of a higher power changed to now?
What I call, because like I still can't do like the God thing.
Sure.
You know, like for me, it's not like one deity man in the sky.
Yeah.
What I call it is unconditional self-love.
Oh, right.
Like, that's how I define my higher power, because that's the thing that I struggle with the most, is to love myself through everything. Like, I had never done, like, in the 9th step, we make amends.
Right.
And I had heard about this whole thing of like making amends to yourself. And I was like, that's bullshit. I was like, I've hurt all these other people. Why am I making amends to myself? And so I never did it.
I never did that either.
And 3 years ago, I joined another 12-step program that deals more with like interpersonal relationships. And my now sponsor had me make an amends to myself.
Right.
And it was like the most mind-blowing experience I was like, oh my God, Lauren, like, what are you doing to yourself?
That's amazing.
You know, and it helped me see the insanity of like, you know, I still have that crazy out-ism where I still do the same thing and I still think it's going to be different. I still think that if I'm perfect, you'll love me and then I'll feel okay. That I still have to people please. I still have to sacrifice myself for others. You know?
It's funny. I was talking to my sponsor about my relationship to my potential, that I feel like I've never lived up to my potential. And he's like, your potential is a boogeyman you use to beat yourself up. And I was like, oh my God, he's right. Like, that is the dynamic. Like, why can't I be this fantasy of myself? Like, that doesn't exist. Like, why are you, what makes you think? Like, that's just some crazy concept that you've inflicted on yourself to make you hate yourself.
And it's always like, once I reach that point, then I'm okay.
I'll be okay. And the funny thing is, you know, you hear stories. I mean, I have, you know, friends in recovery who are wildly successful. And they were wildly successful before they got sober, some of them. And like, they kept getting to the next thing. And then they were like, wow, I still am spiritually bankrupt. You know, none of it satisfied that.
I mean, like, I hit a full bottom with 11 years sober. Like,
really?
Full bottom, like emotional, just destroyed. Yeah. And because I think what happened is like in, you know, 12-step program, it's like everything is about service. It's about, you know, giving back, getting out of yourself, not being selfish. And I think what I was doing when I would write inventory, it's always like, what's my part? What's my part? Right. And I took all of that on as like, oh my God, I have to work on all these things and I'm so horrible and I have to make amends to everybody. But I would never look at the other person's behavior and be like, this is toxic.
Fucked up too. Right.
Like, I'm not okay with this. Right. Like, I don't need this person in my life. Like, I don't have to force this relationship to work.
Right.
You know? I mean, like, I was dating a newcomer that had, like, 11 years sober. And she had, because I finally had, like, my first, like, gay relationship at 11 years.
That was 3 years ago?
Yeah. I finally had,
I remember seeing you during that period, and I was like, oh, Lauren's a lesbian. I didn't know that.
I was like, no, I'm bi.
At that point, like, I must say at that point, Marie was working on Transparent, and like, it seemed like everyone was becoming a lesbian at that moment. So I was like, It
was like the thing. Everyone comes out. I know, because then the other Lauren Morelli,
there is another Lauren Morelli.
Which she's actually the reason that my parents found out that I was bi.
Oh, amazing.
Which is like the worst but like hilarious story ever. Like, it was so awful because I had no intention of ever telling them because I knew it wasn't going to go over well.
Yeah.
Like, because they're, they're older, they're conservative, they don't understand it. Like, my dad thought bisexuality was polygamy. Like, he just didn't. And I was like, no, I think you should get like a pamphlet and like learn about this. Like, I'm not going to marry a man and a woman. Like, that's not how this works. So, I had to, like, when I was in that relationship, it was so toxic and so codependent. Right. And I just, like, lost myself in the other person.
Did you feel, because you were newly out as gay or bi or whatever, that, like, you had to rely on your partner's sense of what that meant? Because I'm just making the assumption that she had been out longer.
Oh, yeah, forever.
So it's sort of like she's your, like, mentor in the lesbian world.
Yeah, it, like, kind of
like in a controlling way.
But I think it was also, like, because I had come out to, like, my friends, probably when I had around, like, 6 years sober, and everybody was like, we've known.
Really?
Like, everyone was like, Lauren.
But were you having relationships? Or no,
I
but
wasn't
you were just like
really,
the occasional
but it was
hookup
like,
or something?
I knew.
Right.
But I also, like, had every intention that I was like, I want to marry a man.
Right.
Like, I want to have the conventional, I don't necessarily. And so it got to a point where I was like, I need to date a woman. Right. Like, I need to do this in my life.
Have a female
I have
experience.
To have this experience.
Yeah.
And so, she, like, kind of taught, like, made me comfortable with that, because it was the first person that, like, we were very good friends before it happened. And we both, like, tried not to date each other. Right. And it just, like, didn't work.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Though.
But then she got loaded.
Right. Oh.
And so
was she sober at first?
Yeah, she was like 6 months sober, and like lived in the halfway house across the street from me. So it's like, Lauren, like, what were you thinking? It's like, what were you thinking? And she was like, said she was, and all of this was lies, I found out, but she, like, said she was a convicted felon, and, like, and it was like, the more damaged you are, the more attracted I am. Right. Because I would trauma bond with people.
Right, sure.
I was like, that's how I felt.
You got some good trauma to share.
Oh my God. I was like a mess. Like, I was totally a mess, and I even, like, had sexual abuse in recovery, and so it was like, there were and I, like, had done, like, 5 years of trauma therapy. So it was like, a lot of wounds were opening, right? And I just, like, poured salt on the wound, and I finally, like, we ended the relationship. Like, I, like, put her in rehab, and she ended up, like, meeting someone and marrying them after, like, a month. And I was like, oh my God, you're crazy. Like, get out of my life. And thank God she moved out of state, so I, like, don't have to see her anymore. But that was, like, such a bottom for me, where I was like, what am I doing?
Sure.
Like, I'm miserable again. I'm out of control. I don't feel like myself.
Yeah.
And so that's when I did the steps again.
Right.
And I looked at it in a totally different light.
And through a different program.
Yeah, through a different program. Where I was like, because even, like, my work relationships, like, I had worked with somebody that that was, like, so, like, hateful. Like, I kept working for bosses that were, like, really over demanding, where they're like, okay, I'm going to have you work 18 hours a day, and you're going to only have, like, 4 or 6 hours off work, and then you have to be back at the office. Right. And I was like, I get to quit. Like, I get to quit.
I can quit.
Like, I don't have to do this.
Amazing.
And I started finding people, like I used my God box a lot through that process, you know, like because I made a God box in rehab and I still have it. And I had like put, you know, I had in it mostly like I buried 3 boyfriends in recovery that all overdosed. Oh, and so I had mostly like, you know, their like letters and pictures and stuff like that. And, you know, like things from when I was loaded and like rehab. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to use this God box in a different way. How does
the God box work?
So basically what you do is, you know, for my job, I started with that. And so I wrote out a list specifically of exactly what I wanted in a job. Right. Like how much money I wanted to make, the type of people I wanted to work for, what I wanted my schedule to be like how I wanted, like what my responsibilities I wanted to be, like everything I wanted in a dream job. And then I put it in the box.
Right.
And I ended up getting
everything,
those jobs.
Right. Wow.
You know, because what it does is like now that I had written it down, when I saw, because like I used to pick red flags like a bouquet of roses.
Right.
Like I freaking loved them. And so, you know, and I was always making excuses. And I was like, well, it's all great except these 2 things, but that's fine.
Right.
You know, and that's the doing it over and over again, expecting something different.
Right.
So when you write it out and you so clearly see that like, this is what makes me happy, then when I am presented with a job opportunity and I'm like, ooh, like that's not quite the list, I know that it's not going to work and I'm not going to be happy.
Right.
And so after my last relationship, I did that for a partner.
Right.
And my sponsor was like, you can write hair and eye color. I mean, everything that you want. Every single thing.
Can you make me one of these God boxes?
Oh my God. You can actually buy them at 12-step stores. They have them. But I made one out of a shoebox.
Yeah, no. I want yours because yours sounds like it's magic.
It is magic. It like, and honestly, it totally is, because I wrote that out for a partner and I just like gave up on dating.
Right.
Like I was like trying, and this was like a year and a half ago. And I just, because like no one was matching what was in the God box.
Yeah.
You know, like I wanted someone that didn't smoke weed because I can't stand the smell of it.
Right.
You know, I didn't care if they drank. You know, and if they were sober, I wanted double-digit sobriety because I had double-digit sobriety, and there was like a big disconnect.
Male or female, did you care?
I didn't care.
Right.
You know, it was all about like the qualities. Like I wanted them to match me financially, like have a career, be driven, be funny, be kind, like, and it felt like so much to ask for, like to ask God for all these wonderful things. I was like, I don't deserve it.
Yeah.
And my sponsor said, she was like, God does not want you to settle.
Right.
Like that is not what your higher power wants. You know, he's not going to be like, well, you could, but I'm going to give you this instead.
Right. So
I had like totally given up, because of course they always say like once you give up is when it's presented. And so my now fiance, I was secretary of a meeting and I asked him to speak, and he, we like stood outside the meeting for 3 hours and couldn't stop talking to each other.
Wow.
And we've been like inseparable since.
That's amazing. And what kind of work does he do?
He works, well, I don't want to like break his anonymity, but he works in sports.
Right.
So he has a great career.
Right.
He's like older than me, which is really good. Like he's almost 40. Like I needed apparently to date someone more mature.
Right.
And this relationship is so healthy. And he has like, I pulled out the list and I was like, he checks every single box, like all of it.
Is he aware of the list?
He is.
Yeah, that's
I told him about it like a couple months in. I was like, I put you in my God box. I was like, and God brought you to me. But that was like such a powerful experience. And I'm like, why did it take me like 12 years to figure this out? Like how to use this?
Yeah. No, that's amazing. The idea, like I always feel like I don't deserve anything because, you know, I've been given so much to begin with, you know, I feel grateful for everything I have.
Oh, yeah.
And, but, you know, that doesn't stop me from wanting more, but I'm always like, the universe, sometimes I'm like, Nick, the universe is telling you, you have enough.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. Like, I mean, I say it kind of as a joke, but, you know, career-wise, like, particularly because when things just, like, fall apart and I'm like, oh, the universe says, you got enough, Nick. Like, and maybe I always think in my head that voice is snarky, but maybe that is like a benevolent voice saying, you have enough.
Yeah. Like,
be thankful for what you have. Like continue to enjoy the things you have and like stop worrying about all the things that you don't have.
Right. I know. Now when I think about like he and I both said to each other, like, you're my promises.
Right.
You know, like it like makes me choke up.
Yeah,
like
yeah, totally.
The things that I have in my life, like I finally like have like my dream job.
Right.
You know, I bought a house last year.
Nice.
You know, it's like I have this beautiful relationship. Like, you know, it's like I have friends that are amazing. Like I have a sponsorship family. Like I'm finally out of therapy and I'm like feeling really good and like not having flashbacks anymore, which is great. Like I've done the work, you know.
What is your relationship like with your parents after all of that?
It's so good.
Right.
It's so good. And, you know, like they were just here last week and like when they left and every time that I like leave them, like this guilt comes over me.
Right.
That I'm like, the last time I lived with them, I was like trying to kill them.
Right.
And I was a disaster. And my dad was handicapped.
Right.
And it was like we lived together at the worst time of all of our lives.
Right.
And now like we're all so happy and I'm sober and present. And now I'm 3,000 miles away.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's
and so
hard.
I'm like, I wish that
we
I
could all be together in this
that, like when everything is like really
healthy
good.
spot.
But I also then I tell myself, I'm like, you know what? The reason we might have a really good relationship is because we're 3,000 miles
like,
away.
Let's be thankful for
because
what we have.
they are my biggest trigger.
Right.
Like they're my biggest trigger because it's always like they're the what. I mean, they were the reason that I was like people pleasing because I like they were most important to me.
Sure.
Like I want them to accept me and I want them to be happy. So. I mean, we have a great relationship now. Like, we love each other so much and they trust me. I mean, you know, they like totally support my program. Like, my dad did not understand 12-step programs.
Sure.
He did not believe in it when I was in rehab. And then a couple years later, he joined the board of directors at the rehab I went to.
And does he, but he's not sober, but he's just supportive,
he's totally normal.
He's a normal
He's totally
person,
normal.
right?
He like never drinks. He like has a beer like every once in a while.
That's amazing.
Yeah, but they've seen. I mean, they saw it firsthand.
Right. Yeah,
like,
they're like,
change.
oh wow, this is something. Bigger than bigger. Talk about the promises.
Yeah. No, it's like insane.
Everything they want.
You know, and I mean, like I was very lucky, you know, in that I get to have this big life. Like everything really fell into place. Like when I was in rehab, you know, I was applying for college, of course, and I applied for film school at Florida State University because I wanted to get in the film industry, and they sent a letter saying that they wanted to interview me. And out of like 3,000 or 4,000 applicants, they only interview 60 people.
Wow.
But you had to go to the school.
Right.
And I was still in rehab.
Right.
And so my parents called and were like begging. They were like, please, this is her future. You have to let her go. So I had to be escorted by my mom and my counselor up to this interview and was like trying to explain because they were like, okay, so but like what's going on right now? Like you have these like escorts, like what's happening? And I was like, well, I'm in rehab for drug addiction.
Right.
And I was like, I know I'm like failing my classes, but I promise I'm going to do really great in your school. And they called the rehab the next day and accepted me.
That's
and I mean,
that's crazy.
It gave me so much hope.
Sure.
You know, that I was like, oh my God, like I have the opportunity,
right?
You know, because I mean, I made a list in rehab of like the things I wanted to do when I got out, and it was so basic,
right?
You know, it was like I want to sleep in my own bed, like I want to like I'm gonna get a job as a waitress, and like somehow get an apartment, you know, like it was still so small, and now my life is like massive,
right? You
know, so again, it goes back to that. If it had gone the way I planned it. It wouldn't be as amazing as it is now.
Totally. That's totally true. I found that, like, my plans are small time compared to what's actually going to happen.
I have no idea what's best for me.
Right.
I really don't. And I'm so grateful, like, for the hell I went through, you know, in that last relationship because I wouldn't be a better partner. You know, I wouldn't have seen what my defects are, and I wouldn't have worked on myself to be able to be a good partner in this relationship. And I'm grateful, like, you know, for the trauma that I went through because now I can help other people, you know, relate to it and get through it. And I, you know, like everything I've gone through, I'm grateful for.
And let me just ask you one last question. What do you do as a daily practice for staying sane, staying sober?
Honestly, I'm really bad at the daily practice.
Right. That's fine.
The thing, because like I was like a meeting whore for a while.
Right.
And now I'm not so much. the thing that I'm really good about the second that I feel uncomfortable, I pick up the phone.
Right.
And so I have what I call my ninjas that are like people with like 30 years plus sober. And I call them on a regular basis. Right. Like that's my thing because I just do better one-on-one. And I'm like, what is your experience? Like what have you gone through that, you know, can help me go through this? So that's honestly probably the biggest thing I do. Like sometimes when I'm getting, like when I get uncomfortable, I do gratitude lists on a daily basis. And I do them like really specifically. Like in the beginning, I would just write like, I'm grateful I have a house. Like I'm grateful I have a car. I'm grateful I have food. And my sponsor was like, no, I want you to make it specific to this day. Like you're writing these every day. Right. And so what that did was it forced me to look for my higher power throughout the day because I knew I had to send her 20 things every day that I was grateful for. And so it was like, I'm grateful so-and-so called and we had a conversation about this. And I'm grateful I saw a butterfly land on a flower. And, you know, it really
reminded of the daily reprieve.
Yeah, like it changes the thinking from, you know, being small and negative to hunting for positive throughout the day. Right. And so that helps me a lot. Like that's a really good daily practice for me to do that. Cool.
This has been wild. I mean, really, I loved hearing it. It was like, it's deep and it's scary and it's full of trauma and it's dangerous, but it's also really wise. And, God, thank you so much for coming in and sharing it.
Yeah, awesome. Absolutely. I've loved this.
If you've been enjoying this podcast, you can go to my Patreon page at www.patreon.com/thedrunkalogs and just toss $1 into the basket. Thank you so much. Drunkalogs cover art is designed and created by John DeManil, and the Drunkalogs theme song is composed and performed by Stephen Stout. I am Nick Morton.